All right, hi everyone. This is going to be a video lesson on section 3.4, so we're on page 98. So this is surveys and cardinal numbers, and this is only really going to make sense if you know section 3.3, so make sure you go back and review that if you need to. But this is going to be sort of a real-life application of what we've been doing lately. I know the past couple of sections have seemed very abstract, but now we get to see some real-life use of sets and Venn diagrams. Also, I apologize if I have a sore throat, but I think we'll get through this. All right, let's see. It starts off by saying we're going to remember that and means intersection, or means union, and not means complement. So remember, we talked about the intersection of two sets uses that symbol, the union of two sets uses that symbol, and complement, something like a complement would look like that. And the definition for intersection has the word and. The definition for union is when something is in one set or the other. And the definition for complement is things that are not in A. All right, so we'll see how that comes up in these problems. But this section is really just a bunch of word problems. So it jumps right into one. So let's take a look. All right. An on-campus survey was done, and students were asked two questions. Would you be willing to donate blood? Would you be willing to help serve a free breakfast? It says set A represents students willing to donate blood. Set B is students willing to serve breakfast. And the survey results are summarized in the figure. So this looks like a Venn diagram, but it's showing us numbers. It's numbers of students. So the idea is this is 210 students. 220 students are in this middle region. That's like the overlap. I guess you'd say that's the intersection of A and B. And then 340 students that are just over here. 230 that are out here. That looks like it's like a universal set, right? Okay, so let's go into some problems. It says use the diagram. And we have to use the diagram because there's not really any numbers up here in these sentences. All the numbers are built into the diagram. So it says how many students are willing to donate blood. And, well, we could look back at the sentences. It says the set A is the students willing to donate blood. So how many students are in A? Well, I see the number 210 right next to A, but we also have to include these 220. Right? Because we want the number of students in the circle of A. And it's not just these 210, it's the 210 plus these 220. So 430 is what we're looking for here. All right, so that's the idea, is we're going to answer these types of questions. It's going to be lots of little questions. And we could use a calculator to help if we need to. Here it is. I've got my calculator if we get to any tough ones. All right, how many students willing to help serve a free breakfast? Okay, we know that that's B. And same idea. We could look at the 340 in B plus the 220. They're also in the circle of B. So 340 plus 220. Use a calculator if you want. You should get 560. Some of these are going to get trickier than that, but we're doing good so far. How many students are willing to donate blood and serve breakfast? I'm going to underline the word and this is why there was a note at the top of the page talking about the word and, the word or. And means intersection. So it's the intersection of students who want to donate blood and students who want to serve breakfast. So it's the intersection of A and B. It's this middle region here, 220. The next problem has the word or. I'll underline the word or. Students willing to donate blood or serve breakfast. So at the top of the page, we said that means the union. Let's see. The union of A with B. So everybody who is in the circle of A, everybody who's in the circle of B, we want basically this 210 plus this 220 plus this 340. Let's write that. And we don't have to subtract anything. I mean, if you look at how the diagram is given, we're not really double counting anything because we got these students were counted, these students were counted, these students were counted. Next one says, how many students were willing to donate blood but not serve breakfast? Do we have a symbol for but not? I mean, there is a symbol for not. That would be the complement. Well, okay, we want the students who are willing to donate blood. So that means students who are in the circle of A. But we want students who are not in the circle of B. All right. I'll put this as a little note. This is students in A, but not in B. Is what I'm thinking. So looking up here, it's the 210, right? 210 students are in A, but we're not including the ones who are in B. And feel free at any point in this video, feel free to pause it and try some of this on your own if you'd like. Later, I'll probably have some that I specifically ask you to do that with. Okay, problem 6, how many are willing to serve breakfast but not donate blood? So other way around. So we want students who are in B but not in A. It's the 340 labeled in the diagram. You could go in and you could like shade in different parts if that helps you. I don't want to do that because we have, 8 different little problems here, so it would get kind of messy. How many students are neither willing to donate blood nor serve breakfast? All right, so we want students who are not in the circle of A, not in the circle of B. That means we're looking at these outsiders. The 230 fits that description. So you see some of these, I'm just putting 230. Some of these don't even have any adding or subtracting. It's like I don't need a calculator for that problem. It's more about just understanding what is it asking me and where can I find that in the diagram. So you just have to read it extra carefully. Finally, how many students were surveyed? How many students overall? And you could look back at the problem and then you say, wait a second, they didn't really tell us that, did they? But it's in the diagram because every student is accounted for somewhere in these 4 numbers. A student either gets put into one of these categories or they're in the outside category. So it's the 210. Let me write it down here. 210 plus the 220 plus the 340 plus the 230. That's everybody. Everybody is in one of those categories. And if you add that up with the calculator, you get 1,000. All right, so let's move on to the next page. And the next page starts with a box here we need to look at. All right, so it's called a theorem. I don't know if theorem is really the best word for it. It's really a 3-step strategy, and it's a strategy for solving survey problems. The one that we just did on the previous page gave us a Venn diagram that was labeled with numbers. And if you take a quick glance at the bottom of the page, you see we're not always going to be given that. Sometimes it's up to us to label the Venn diagram. That's what this is about. So the way we do it is step 1, use the description, that would be the sentences, to draw a Venn diagram. Step 2, this is a big one. Use the survey's results, that would be the sentences that are given, to determine the cardinality, remember that's the size, for each region in the Venn diagram. Start with the intersection of the sets, the innermost region, and then work outward. So we'll do an example in just a minute. You'll see what I mean. And then step 3, then use the completed diagram to answer the problem's questions. And by the way, what we did on the previous page was basically just step 3, because the diagram was already given for us. We were able to go straight to this. All right, so let's see one where we have to do the diagram. So this says, in a poll, 2,500 adults were selected, asked to agree or disagree with the following statement. Okay. The results of the survey are given here as numbers. If half the people surveyed were women, okay, we have 2 questions. So there's a lot going on here. There's some numbers given up here. Also, this looks like it might be important, right? I mean, it says half the people surveyed, and then at the top it tells us how many people were surveyed. So, okay, we could kind of use that if we need to. How many men agreed with the statement? How many disagreed with the statement? Here's what I'm going to do. Since this is the first time that we're making one of these ourselves, I'm going to do some scratch work or some notes off to the side. Step 1. Step 1. And I'm talking about the 3-step process from the top of the page. Step 1 says, use the survey's description to define sets and draw a Venn diagram. So I think that the diagram is already started for us. And if this wasn't given, we could draw it ourselves, right? You could kind of figure out we're talking about 2 sets, they intersect somewhere, and then put a big box around them. So draw that if it wasn't given for us. But we need to label categories. The categories can be a little tricky. Let's think about what these categories are. I think that what we really want is one of the categories seems to be women. One of the categories seems to be people who agreed. And there's going to be some overlap, right? Here, I'll write W and A. And I'll label them W and A. So my W is women. My A is people who agreed with the statement. And you see, by choosing those to be my categories, it makes sense that there is some overlap here. The women who agreed with the statement are going to be in this overlap or this intersection. And then women who did not agree would just be out here. People who agreed who were not women would be over here, right? So all of these categories make sense if we label them that way. And that can be a little tricky, so you have to do whatever makes sense for the problem. Step 2, up at the top of the page, it says that's where you want to determine cardinality, or the size number of people in each region. And it says in bold at the top of the page, start with the intersection of the sets. So I'm going to put a little note here and say 650 women agreed. So fill in 650 below. Think about where the 650 needs to be. It's right in the middle. That's the intersection of our categories. There's more to step 2. We'll do this until we have the whole thing labeled. Now we work our way outward. So we either kind of look at this area or this area. And I'm going to say, let's use the 1270. 1270 people agreed. So use, I'm trying to think about what number to put here. It's not 1270, right? Because we already have 650 people already in the circle of A, but the circle of A needs to have a grand total of 1270 in it. So if I put 1270 here, then I have too many. It seems like we need 600 something, right, to get the number of people I write here plus the number of people here to add up to 1270. So what we do is 1270 minus the 650. With a calculator, you could do that. You get 620. 620 is the number that makes sense to go here. And let's think about this. Now, if I look at the total number of people in the circle A, it adds up to a total of 1270, and that's what I wanted. Next, I want to figure out what goes here. This is where we need to use that half. I underlined that earlier. I thought half the people surveyed were women. We're looking at the women category, so yeah, I think it makes sense that we need to use the half somewhere. There were 2,500 total, right? Let's say half of the 2,500 surveyed were women. So that's 1250. It means that the circle that I've labeled W needs a total of 1250 in it, but I already have 650 people in it, so let's do 1250 minus the 650. 600 is what I want. Put 600 people in that area. Are we done with step 2? No, there's still one more thing. We need to figure out if there are any other people out here in the universal set, right? So are there any people that were not accounted for so far? The total number of people should be 2,500. So does this add up to 2,500? I don't think it does. I think we're missing some people. So, I mean, we could check. We can see how far off are we. 600 plus 650 plus 620. Yeah, we don't have enough people yet. So there are some people out here that we need to do. We could find it by doing 2,500 minus the 600 minus the 650 minus the 620. That would give us how many leftover people were there. $630. So somewhere in our picture, put 630 floating around out here. And now, if I add up all four of these numbers, it should add up to 2,500. All right, and I sometimes do scratch work off to the side, and I sometimes underline the numbers that I'm adding to my diagram. That's just kind of my habit. I like this little underline as I add them in. Okay, so that was a big step 2, and now step 3, up at the top of the page, is now answer the questions, finally. And answering the questions is actually the fast part. Setting up this diagram carefully was the part that takes the most time. So, question 1, how many men agreed with the statement? If we were careful about setting this up, well, I guess with the way this problem is phrased, this problem, I guess, is grouping people into men and women. All right, so number of people who were not women who agreed with the statement, 620. So it's sort of find the appropriate thing on the diagram that you already set up. And then how many disagreed with the statement. So how many total people disagreed? Well, it would be all the people that are not in A. I just used the word not, so we could say the complement of A. It's the 600 people here and the 630 people here. 600 plus the 630. We're looking for 1,230. That's the total number of people that are not in the circle of A. So you see, we answered the two questions really fast, but it was important that we had the correct numbers already figured out. Okay, so the rest of this section is just more examples, but what makes the next ones different is now we're going to see Venn diagrams with 3 circles. So let's look at page 100. All right, so this says 60 people were contacted, responded to a survey. Following information was obtained. All right, 6 people liked comedies, dramas, and science fiction. Comedies and dramas. So I think my categories are sort of clear. I think these are going to be 3 categories. And if we look at everything here, yeah, it's just mentioning those 3 over and over. Comedies, dramas, science fiction. It started a picture for us. And, you know, if we do that step 1, step 2, step 3, the first thing to do would be to draw a picture and label it. So we'll go kind of back and forth between using these numbers and looking at our picture. I'm going to label comedy, drama, science fiction. Actually, if you label them in a different order, that's fine, as long as we have all 3. So looking at all these numbers and figuring out where do we need to use these, let's remember what the previous page said, and I think it said this in bold, was to work from the intersection first. Work with the innermost region and then work your way out. So the innermost region would be this intersection of all 3. So are there any people who liked all 3? Let's see. Yeah, at the beginning. 6 people liked all 3. So the 6 people goes in the middle. I realize I'm going to be moving the page up and down constantly if we keep going back and forth like that. Maybe I'll try to keep this picture on the frame, and I'll just kind of point upward, and you'll know I'm looking at those numbers. I don't know. I might need to actually write some math, though. We'll figure it out one way or another. Number 2 up above said 13 people liked comedies and dramas. So I'm thinking, well, here's my comedies, here's my dramas. If somebody likes comedies and dramas, they live in here, right? But we already have 6 of them. It's this kind of football-shaped region that I'm kind of tracing. Those are the people who like comedies and dramas. We already have 6 of them in the picture, which means I need 7 more in order to get 13. There's my 13 people who like comedies and dramas. 6 of them happen to also like science fiction. Does that make sense? So maybe I'll write it off to the side here. I did 13 minus 6, and that's how I got the 7. So let's look at number 3. What does that tell us? And I don't know if we're necessarily going to do all of these in order, but we'll start reading them in order, and we'll skip some if we need to and come back to them. Number 3 up above says 10 people liked comedies and science fiction. Comedies and science fiction is the intersection of the circle C with the circle S. So again, there's like a football-shaped region here. I want 10 people in that category. I already have 6 of them, so 10 minus 6 is 4. I'm going to put 4 people here. And we keep going like this. Next piece of info up above says 11 people liked 11 people like dramas and science fiction. Here's drama, science fiction. Intersection of those two circles is another football shape. We want 11 people to be in there, so 11 minus the 6 we already have means I need 5 people here. So the previous page said you do the innermost region first. We did. We put the 6 first, and then work your way outward. And so far, we've been doing that by taking care of these ones. Next, we're probably going to take care of these, and we're probably going to deal with the outermost region last. Okay. Next up, number 5 up above says 26 people liked comedies. So the entire circle of C needs to have 26 people in it. We already have a bunch of people who like comedies, and we need to figure out how many more go up here. So let's say the 26 that they're telling us, minus the ones we've already counted. So minus the 7, minus the 6, and minus the 4. Winds up being 9. I'm going to put 9 in here. So you see how it would be wrong if I just wrote a 26 in this spot? It needs to be a 9 so that the total number of people who like comedies is 26. Next up, dramas, 21 people, it says, like dramas. So I'm figuring out how many people I'm going to write in here. It's probably a small number. 21 minus the 7, minus the 6, minus the 5. Get 3. So that this adds up to 21 in the circle of D. Next up, how many people liked science fiction? 25 minus 6 minus 5 minus 4. Get 10. Put a 10 in here. And we have one more thing. We have this outer box. Let's see. For the outer box, there is one piece of information at the top of the page that I haven't used yet. Look at the very first sentence of the problem. It says the total number of people surveyed was 60. So how many people? What number do I need to write out here? It's not 60 because, look, we have so many people already accounted for. So the number that I write out here are going to be the number of people who don't like any of these 3 categories. They're not comedy fans, drama fans, science fiction fans. They're just other people who were surveyed. So we'll say they're the number of people who liked none. And it's going to be 60 minus... You know how we've been subtracting? We'd have like the big number minus the small ones. I need to do 20 minus all other categories. And see what I get. So, let me get my calculator. Oh, I'm covering my picture. That's okay. I have it on another page. 60 minus, let's get every little number we wrote. So I think minus 9, minus 7, minus 6, minus 4, minus 3, minus 5, minus 10. Let me double check that. 60 minus 9, minus 7, minus 6, minus 4, minus 3, minus 5, minus 10. Yeah, okay. 16. Another thing you could do to double check is take every number we've written here and figure out, does it add up to 60? And it does. So, looks good. Now, let's not forget, we have like a very good detailed picture here. Let's not forget that there is a question here, right? Right here. Use a Venn diagram to determine, what does this want from us? How many of those surveyed liked none of these categories? And how many liked only comedies? So we could answer the question finally. The number of people who liked none, we just found that one, that was 16. And the number of people who liked only comedies, what do you think? It would be the number of people in the circle of C who are not in the circle of D and not in the circle of S. So it's 9. So the actual questions that it asked us, we answered very quickly, but setting up the Venn diagram took a while. All right, so always make sure you read problems carefully and make sure you answered everything. I think it would be easy to actually go through all of this and then forget to answer the question, but we need to answer. This is what they wanted from us, and we did answer it down here. Okay, so the rest of this section has 3 more problems like this. Three full-page problems that each have a Venn diagram with 3 circles on it. So if we were meeting in class, I would have you try all 3 of these one at a time, and then I would talk about them. So I'm going to suggest that for each of these problems, you pause the video and try it yourself, and then check back with me. But I'm just going to go ahead and talk about them. Remember, we want to start at the center and work your way out, right? Or you start at the innermost region. You start at the intersection of everything. Well, maybe first things first, we need to label the diagram and say, what are the categories? So this one is a survey of students, and we're talking about different types of transportation, people who use cars, public transportation, and bikes. So I go ahead and label this as cars, public transportation, and bikes. And yeah, there's going to be some intersections. There might be some students who say they used 2 different kinds of transportation, or maybe all 3. Right? Or maybe some students used none. We'll see. So, ideally, I would like to start at the center. So, is that given? Do we know how many students used all 3? And reading through the whole thing carefully, yes, we know 23 students used all 3 modes of transportation. So, let's fill that in first, 23. Next, I'm looking to fill in these, football-shaped regions, the ones that are the intersection of 2 circles. And we do have that given. It says 48 students used cars and public transportation. So I have my circle for C, my circle for P. 48 students are supposed to be at the intersection. So what I'll do is 48 minus the 23 we already have accounted for gets me 25. 25 goes in here. I'll just do my scratch work off to the side like that. Okay, if you want, you could kind of go through and do a little check mark as you sort of use parts of the problem to make sure that you don't use something twice. Next up, 37 students used cars and bikes. So I'm looking at my cars, looking at my bikes. I need that over here. So 37 minus the 23 we already have gets me 14. Next, I want to try to take this region, and it says 25 used public transportation and bikes, but I want to subtract the 23 we already labeled. It means there's only 2 in this area. And, go and check these off if you want. We used that, we used that. But we're not just copying those numbers into the diagram. It wouldn't really make sense to copy the 37 and the 25. We need to subtract out that 23. Otherwise, those students would get counted more than once. All right, well, we're working our way out. So next we're looking at these bigger shapes and looking at other sentences here. It says, of those surveyed, 118 used cars. So do I have 118 students in here so far? No, I have some of them. Let's do 118 minus the 25 I already did, minus the 23 we already did, minus the 14. So, a calculator comes in handy for this stuff. We get 56. And you can double check that now we do have 118 students in the circle of C. Next up, 100 used public transportation. I'll write that off to the side here. 100 minus the 25 minus 23 minus 2. Get 50. And a similar thing down here for B. I need 75 minus 2 minus 23 minus 14. 36. Still one more category to go. We need some kind of number out here. And it's possible maybe the number out here could be 0. It could be that maybe all the students are accounted for. We don't know yet. So to find out the outer category, there was a number we haven't used yet. It's the 225 total number of students who were surveyed. But don't put 225 here. You have to do 225 minus all other categories. Just like we've been doing a big number minus small numbers, right? We have to do that here as well. If you do 225 minus all of these categories, you should get 19. I did that on a calculator already. I got 19. Now, if I add up all of these numbers, it should add up to 225. Finally, we can move on to answering whatever questions are down below. So we have a good diagram. We'll refer to that as needed. How many used only public transportation? That would be the students who are in P only, and that is 50. We already did the hard part, and now we just kind of use our nice picture to answer these. How many used cars in public transportation but not bikes? Well, we do have to be a little careful. I want cars and public transportation, the intersection or overlap between cars and public transportation, but not bikes. So I don't want this 23. I just want this 25. I'll point to it here. This 25. How many used cars or public transportation? That's the word or. Cars or public transportation, but not bikes. That's a little different, isn't it? So cars or public transportation would be students who are in the circle of C or the circle of P. So that could be a lot of students, but not bikes. So not in the circle of B. So I'm thinking I want these 50, these 25, and these 56. The 50, the 25, and the 56. Wouldn't those be the students who are either the P or the C? But I'm not including anything in the circle of B. So here's what I'll write. 50 plus 25 plus 56. Should get 131. So some of these are like brain teasers or like a little puzzle, I guess, is, puzzling out what exactly are they asking me for. Next one, how many used exactly 2 of these modes of transportation? So it has the word exactly, so it means no more, no less. I think that would be the students who are in this 25, this 14, and this 2, right? Because that's 2 types of transportation, 2 types, but not all 3. So we'll go with the 25 plus the 14 plus the 2. It doesn't say which 2, it just says any 2. And finally, how many did not use any of these 3 modes? Well, that's the number we found above to be 19. It was students who were not in any of those 3 circles. And, this could be students who live close enough to campus to walk, and, maybe they were surveyed and said, I don't use cars or public transportation or bikes. Maybe they just walk. All right, so real quick before we do the next one, I just want to point out, this was a good standard problem for this section. So I really want to make sure that you feel good about this kind of problem. Notice that of the numbers that were given, like the 118, for example, we didn't actually write 118 anywhere in the diagram. I mean, it wound up getting used. I guess it was up here in the scratch work, right? But you don't actually put 118 in the diagram. If you did, it would throw everything off. And that's something else that I wanted to say is you have to be extra careful in these steps, because if you get one category wrong, it can throw the other ones off. Like if this 14 was wrong, then it would probably make the 56 wrong, and then if the 56 is wrong, it would probably make the 19 wrong. So it can kind of have like a snowball effect or domino effect. So be extra careful with how you're setting this stuff up. All right, so let's look at the next one. All right, so I said this a little bit earlier, but I really want to encourage you to try these on your own. Let me say especially this one. So if you haven't tried any of these yet, I really want to encourage you to pause the video, try this one on your own, and then I'll go over it. So here we are. This is actually pretty similar to the previous one. So if you watched me do the previous one, hopefully you tried this one yourself. We want to work from the inside out. Well, we also need to label the categories. So I think we should somehow label these, I guess, mayonnaise, mustard, and ketchup. It's kind of unfortunate that 2 of them start with the letter M. They both start with the same letter. So I labeled this MA and MU for mustard to tell them apart, and then K for ketchup. And if you labeled them slightly differently, it should still work out as long as we have those as our 3 categories some way or another. Okay, work from the inside out. So this does tell us 70 people used all 3, so I fill that in first, 70. Next up, 75 people use mayonnaise and mustard, so off to the side, I'll say 75 minus the 70 we already counted gets me 5. 70 use mayonnaise and ketchup, so 70 minus... Oh, this is interesting. I'm looking for what number goes in here. Well, we already have 70 accounted for. So this is 0. It is possible to have a 0 in one of these spots. That just happens to be the first time that's happened to us. By the way, you should never get a negative number. We can't have a negative number of people who like a condiment or something, but it is possible to have 0. 210 people minus 70 is 140. That goes in here. So now we've taken care of the people who like all 3 and the people who like some combination of 2 of them, and we're working our way out. The problem says 95 people use mayonnaise. So 95 minus the 5 we already counted and the 70 we already counted. And I don't need to subtract 0. Subtracting 0 won't do anything. So 20. It says 229 use mustard. So 229 minus 5 minus 70 minus 140. Don't forget, we're doing everything in the circle of mustard minus the ones that we already have accounted for. So I get 14. All right, and finally over here, 288 use ketchup. So 288 minus 140 minus 70 is 78. Goes in here. And the beginning of the problem said it was a survey of 350 college students. So let's do 350 minus all other categories. That's the one that can take the longest on a calculator. We have to subtract everything we wrote in here. I worked this out on a calculator already. I got 23. Now, this looks like there's a half of a page of questions. So I would say what we just did is probably, half of the work, and then the other half is all these little questions. How many students do not use any condiment? That's the last thing we just answered, so that's 23. You see, it's really good that we took the time to finish the diagram before I started tackling these questions, because I have a feeling if we tried to go back and forth between them, we would wind up having to fill out the whole diagram anyway, so we should just do it first. How many students use ketchup only? It's this right here, right? It's the circle of ketchup, but only the students in ketchup without being in any of the other ones. So 78. How many use mayonnaise only? That is the 20 that we wrote above. How many use, look at this, ketchup and mustard, I'll underline and, but not mayonnaise. So they're in the circle of ketchup, they're in the circle of mustard, but they're not in the circle of mayonnaise. Here's ketchup, here's mustard. It's this. It's the 140 and not including the 70. 140. See what I mean? That it's sort of like a puzzle to decipher what it's asking for. How many students use ketchup or mustard but not mayonnaise? So they're in the circle of ketchup or they're in the circle of mustard. And remember, we said earlier in the chapter that when we use or, we mean or both. So they're in ketchup or mustard or both, but not in the circle of mayonnaise. So for us, that's going to be the 14 plus 140 plus 78. We already labeled those individually, and we need those three. Adds up to 232. How many students use at least 2 of the condiments? Okay, well that means they use 2 of the condiments or all 3. So the students who use 2 are the 5s, the 0, the 140, and the students who use all 3 are right in the middle of the picture. So let's do 5 plus 140 plus 0 plus 70. We get 215. How many use exactly 1? Okay, so we have that in our picture, right? That would be these 20 students only use mayonnaise. These 14 only use mustard. And these 78 only use ketchup. So we want the 20 plus the 14 plus the 78. 112. How many use exactly 2? That would be the 5 plus the 140 plus the 0. I don't really need to write plus 0, but it's okay. It doesn't hurt to write that. It's actually nice that I wrote +0 because it sort of shows what I'm doing. And then how many students use at least most, oh, whoa. How many students use at most one of the condiments? At most one. Well, at most one, that would be students who use one condiment or 0. How many students, let's say, how many students use none? We have that on our picture as 23, right? In fact, that was the answer to part 1. It was this 23. And then how many students use 1? Well, that was the answer to part 7. That was 112. So I think what this problem wants is the 23 plus the 112. Get 135. All right, we have one more to go, and I'm going to go ahead and warn you that this last one is a little tricky. It's a little different. So let me talk us through this one. And, of course, you're welcome to pause and try this. It's a little bit of a puzzle to figure this one out. So one thing about this is it only says to construct a Venn diagram. It doesn't have any other questions for us. So this one is all about putting together the diagram, but it's a tricky one. All right, let's see. What makes this tricky? Local television station sends out questionnaires. It's about viewers who want to see different types of things. Documentary, interview show, or reruns of a game show. So those are going to be our 3 categories. Let's go ahead and label this. How about D for documentary, I for interview, and R for reruns? Or you could say G for game show, because it said reruns of a game show. Either way is fine. I actually chose R because I looked ahead at the rest of this, and I saw that it's just referred to here as reruns. So let's use R. All right, so D, I, R, those are my categories. There were 400 responses. Okay, we'll probably use that somewhere. And this gives us some detailed results, and we want to draw the Venn diagram. Now, I know that earlier we said that you like to start at the center, the intersection of everything, and then work your way outward. What makes this one a little trickier is I think we can't start at the center. The center would be if somebody liked all 3, but I don't think they tell us that. They don't tell us the number of people who like all 3. So let's just kind of read through these and use information where we can. 120 were interested in an interview show and documentary, but not reruns. You could probably use that right away. Interview and documentary, but not reruns. Let's see. Here's interview, here's documentary. The intersection of them is this football shape over here. But if it says not reruns, then we leave out this middle part and we say the 120 goes here. Makes sense, right? Those are people who like the interview show, the documentary, but not reruns, so they're not in here. So actually, yeah, we used something right away. We'll see if we can do that or not. And I know that in the previous problems, I said you don't always want to just copy numbers from here onto the diagram. But in this case, it made sense because of this sentence. It was very detailed. It was telling us exactly where it goes. The next one says 16 are interested in an interview show and reruns, but not a documentary. So here's interview, reruns, not a documentary. So we're just talking about down here, 16. So maybe this won't be so bad after all, because we're able to fill some things in based on what's given, 16. 56 were interested in reruns, but not documentaries or interviews. Let's see. 56, they're in the circle of reruns, but they're not in the circle of documentaries, and they're not in the circle of interviews. Let's be careful about where we put this 56, if we're going to put it anywhere. Yeah, in the circle of reruns, not in D and not in I. 56 goes here. Yeah, we can use it, but it has to go in the right place. They like reruns. They don't like interviews. They don't like documentaries. 56 has been used. 96 were interested in an interview show, but not a documentary. So they're in the circle for I. They're not in the circle for D. Think about what that shape would look like. Or, like what part of this would I shade in if I was shading in that region? Like, they're interested in an interview, but not a documentary. I think what we would get would be this sort of crescent moon shape. I wish I had a bunch of scratchwork versions of this picture, but let's do a little one over here to show you what I mean. They're interested in the interview show, but not the documentary. So if I was shading this in like we did a couple of sections ago, they're in here. 96 people are in that part of the picture. But I already have 16 of them, don't I? These 16? So I think what we want is 96 minus 16 is 80. I want to put 80 people in here. That way, this shape has 96 people in it. So I used the 96, but that's how I used it. So I'll go back to my 96 and put a little check mark next to it. Yeah, so this is definitely a puzzle. Step 5, or number 5, 40 people were interested in a documentary and reruns. Documentary and reruns. So they are at the intersection of documentary and rerun circles. So here's my documentary circle, my rerun circle. The intersection of them is this football shape, and they're telling me that there are 40 people in it. But here's the problem. I don't know how many of those 40 go in the middle and how many of those 40 go here. I don't really want to put a 40 in the middle because that would be assuming, right? Or maybe it's split in some way. So I think what we should do is skip and come back to. We're going to skip number 5 and come back to it because I don't think we have enough information to use that number yet. Let's see what else we can fill in first. Number 6 says 24 people were interested in an interview show and reruns. So interview show is this big circle, reruns is this big circle. At the intersection of them, I have this football shape, and 24 people should be in here. Oh, well, look at this. We already have 16 of them. So if I need this to add up to 24, it's 16 plus 8 is going to get me 24 people. So that's how I used the 24. 24 has been used. Actually, that makes me think now we could go back and answer that previous one, couldn't we? Because when I was looking at the 40 and I was concerned that we didn't have enough information, now we can do it. The total here needs to be 40. I already have 8, so this has to be 32. That makes sense because now this is a total of 40. Finally, it says 32 people were interested in none of the 3. You know what? We actually could have done this first. The 32 just goes out here. That one is just given to us. So really, at any step of the process, you could have looked at number 7 and just filled that in. We're missing one thing, though. I mean, this problem just said construct a Venn diagram, but we're missing one region, one shape. And then you say, wait, didn't we use everything? Didn't I put check marks next to everything? Well, there is one thing we haven't used yet. We haven't used this. There were 400 responses total. So let's see. If I were to add up all of these numbers, they probably don't add up to 400. So the category of D only, in this case, it's going to be 400 minus all other categories. And we can do that because we have filled in all other categories, right? So whatever you're doing last, in this problem, it turned out to be this area, but whatever you're doing last, as long as you have everything else filled in, you can do this. So I worked this out with a calculator. So 400 minus 120, minus 8, minus 32, like every number we wrote in here, and I got 56. And now we have a completed Venn diagram. And in a problem like this, if it's just asking you to make a Venn diagram, it's okay to have scratch work all over the page. You know, I have some stuff down below, stuff off to the right. Maybe you surround it with scratch work. But try to actually keep your scratch work outside of the box so that what we have in the box is nice and neat and just shows the answers. Also, make sure you labeled DIR or whatever you call them. If you call it G for game show, that's fine, but they do need to be labeled in some way. All right, so this looks good. All right, so we're going to wrap this up, and what we've seen in this section is this is actually like a real-life practical use for Venn diagrams and some stuff about sets and how they intersect. Each one of these problems takes a while. I think we probably spent about 10 minutes on each problem, and it's good to take your time. It might even take longer than that. That's fine. But yeah, just be extra careful because usually if you have one little mistake, it can throw off everything else. And if you're ever doing a problem like this on a quiz or an exam, you know, try to double check your arithmetic if you have time. But yeah, just take it slow and it should work out. All right, so that's going to be it. And of course, feel free to let me know if you have any questions. All right, take care and I'll see you soon.